President-elect Trump's return to the White House has shaken NATO allies because of his bromance with Vladimir Putin and other anti-democratic strongmen. And joining us now, Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and author of the new novel, The Restless Wave. Admiral, you have a new piece in Bloomberg titled, NATO Will Likely Survive Trump, but at a Cost. So what is the cost? What is the effect on Ukraine most immediately?
There'll be a lot of internal tension within the alliance, Andrea, and it'll stem from two things. One is increased pressure from the Trump administration for our European allies to increase their defense spending. They've made a lot of progress, by the way, since the invasion of Ukraine, because they look at Vladimir Putin as a very real threat, but look for a lot of push from Team Trump to try and get that spending up even higher. Secondly, your point, Andrea, there'll be tension about Ukraine and the way forward. Europe is still very strongly behind Ukraine, whereas Team Trump has expressed a lot of skepticism, at least about American support to Ukraine. That'll be a source of tension within the alliance as well. And I think, unfortunately, for our friends in Kyiv, they are in for a more difficult time getting what they need to continue the fight against Vladimir Putin.
And let's talk about Israel and Netanyahu, because there are very few leaders as close to Donald Trump right now, or who want to be, than Bibi Netanyahu. He's already altering policy. Today, he named a new ambassador to Washington, who is very much a part of that conservative coalition. He was a settler. He was a close, he was chief of staff to Netanyahu when Netanyahu was finance minister. He's a rabbi. So he's part of that religious coalition in Israel, and replacing Mike Herzog, who was the very effective ambassador and the brother, of course, of Israel's President Herzog. So we already see that, and he's continuing and expanding his attacks in Lebanon, despite a lot of pressure from the U.S. before the election, from this administration, to pull back and, stick to the southern border area where all those weapons and Hezbollah are stockpiled.
Yeah, I think Bibi Netanyahu is, at this point, very, very happy to see Donald Trump come back to the White House, because he feels he'll get very full-throated support from President Trump. And in addition to all the points you just made, quite correctly, Andrea, I'd add one more. Netanyahu is so confident in that support that he just fired his defense minister, a man named Yoav Gallant, who I know quite well, former general, former head of the Israeli Defense Forces, who was, by all accounts, a moderating influence on Netanyahu. Netanyahu has now fired him, and I think will continue to push very, very hard, both in the Gaza and up north against Hezbollah. It pushes the hope of a ceasefire and the hope of a hostage release even further away.
And then there's China, of course, the most important relationship, arguably, in the future. China has had a lot of bashing from Donald Trump, the threat of 60% tariffs, which would really be a trigger, and a lot of aggressive moves by China now in the South China Sea.
That is a very good description of all of the challenges right now. The only ray of hope I can give that would mitigate against a rise in U.S.-Chinese tensions would be that it is possible that Donald Trump is using the 60% tariff number, for example, as a negotiating tactic. Come in high and hard against China, at least thus far in his rhetoric, and then perhaps calibrate it back. And you're showing some good photography now. I think that Xi and Trump legitimately have a reasonable chemistry together, and that may be the way to unwind some of the tensions you described. Last thing, Andrea, I'm watching the Philippines very closely here. People don't realize that the Philippines are a treaty ally of the United States, just like all of our NATO partners. So when we see China and the Philippines nose to nose, warships bow to bow in the South China Sea over territorial dispute, That's a very concerning tension point that could also increase the challenges ahead.
Yeah, and as you correctly point out, looking at those pictures early in the first Trump years, President Xi visited Mar-a-Lago. Donald Trump's grandchildren sang to him in Mandarin. Right. So there were a lot of personal connections there that could be revived. Yeah. Admiral James Stavridis, a lot to talk about next week about who the new National Security Cabinet will be. We're working on that. So stay close, I hope.